Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Uncomfortable. Here with me in the studio, Mr. Mike Muse.
Hey.
I feel like I have to say your name that way.
Yeah, it's all good.
Political and pop culture expert. You specialize in this intersection of entertainment and politics where there is so much happening these days, which is fascinating. We're going to get into that too, talk about the Oscars. But first, we always like to hear about how a guest comes to kind of do the work that you do, why you specialize in what you do. So tell me about you. Where'd you grow up? Tell me about your family.
It's such an interesting story, Amna. So I'm from Lansing, Michigan originally.
Okay.
I went to University of Michigan, I guess where the story begins. And I majored in industrial engineering and chemical research.
Did you grow up in Michigan too your whole
life?
life?
Yeah, my whole life from Lansing, Michigan. I grew up there. My family's still there. My mom and dad, my siblings have spread out and have left the nest, if you will.
Yeah.
I went down the street to the University of Michigan and I did industrial engineering and nuclear chemical research. And I loved it. I had a really great time with it, but I didn't see it as a fit for me. I didn't see me with my personality being able to do that every day from 9 to 5. And so
what led you to that in the first place, though?
That's a really great question. Since we're getting uncomfortable, right? There is this notion, and especially I went to a public high school. It was a really great public high school too as well. Lansing at the time was booming because of the automotive industry. Things have changed, obviously. But in the automotive industry or a city has a strong economy, everything else is strong. The school system, the school districts. And the school that I went to was a very diverse school. But at the time, though, there was this notion, and it still exists today, and this is the uncomfortable part of our conversation, is where if you're black and you're smart, you're automatically pushed into the sciences, right? You're not really allowed to explore other areas. It's part generational too as well. A lot of us are first-time college generation students, and so we don't know any other. And so my counselors and teachers at the time said, Mike, engineering is a great career, and you will always have a job, and you're black, and you should do this. And so I did it.
You should represent because you can.
Yeah.
Have the ability, so you should.
Yeah, and you always have a job, right? And so it wasn't a negative thing. And so I'm not saying what my teachers did was anything negative associated with it. It was just what it was at the time, right? And they were looking out for my best interest, but in doing so, it didn't allow me the other opportunity to explore other careers. And so by the time I got to college, I recognized that this actually isn't me. It doesn't really fit me. And I had an internship at Motorola out in Phoenix, the summer after my second year. And that's when I realized that this isn't it. They had molecular structures hanging down from the ceilings and science journals on the desk. And I was like, I can't do this every day from 9 to 5. But you stick with it, right? And so you can't turn back now because you're X amount of years in, you're X amount of money in. And it's difficult then to switch majors at that point. And then what was I going to switch to, Amna? I hadn't really had the freedom to explore anything else but that. But I knew I was unhappy. And so what happened was I talked with one of my associate deans of the college. Her name was Lisa. And so she said, Mike, you're so unhappy. She said, let it go. She said, because you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You're doing it for your family. You're doing it for the pressure of your peers and the social pressure that you're in. And she said, but don't be foolish. Graduate. You only have one semester left. And then she said, then explore other opportunities. And at that time, I had received a final offer from a major consulting firm, one of the big fives here in New York City. And I turned them down unbeknownst to my parents. Right? And so they didn't know. They thought I just pushed my start date back.
Now, did your parents know that you were unhappy, or did they think you were continuing on this path and
No, they didn't know I was unhappy at all because on the surface, everything looked great. I was receiving awards. I was on this national board for engineers. They would come to campus. They would come to my conferences. I was a regional chair of, in different states.
Oh my gosh.
And so they saw this, and they saw me getting these fantastic internships. They were really difficult internships to get. They saw me getting scholarships, and so they didn't see anything else, right? And I didn't want to concern them. I didn't want them to worry them. It was one of those things, well, let me figure it out on my own, and then I can do it.
Present them with the problem, let me try to sort it out myself.
Exactly. And so the whole idea was, I'm going to move to Florida. I'm going to be a bartender, right?
That was the
How random, Amna, right? How random.
Then I had this great meeting with the men, and you were like, I'm going to go to Florida, and I'm going to be a bartender.
That's exactly what it is. I didn't even drink, Amna, at the time.
How? Why?
When, what? I just wanted a departure, right? Because not only that, president of my fraternity, I was, student leader of the year at a large institution such as Michigan. I was in student honor societies that were really large on scale. And so I was really kind of a very focal point of the university. And when you're that young, 18, 19, 20, 21, and you assume that much responsibility, and you don't have the resources that an athlete has on campus for student support and psychological and mental health services that you do as student leaders, which is something I think that we should focus on as a nation.
That's a really good point.
Is those students who are actively involved on campus, they need just as equal amount of supports that we give other people who are out front supporting services. And so I just wanted a break. And in that, I was like, let me just find self, right? And then
good for you, by the way, to recognize that. at that time in your life? Because most people wouldn't, right? Once you're tracked for something, once you're heading a direction, you just kind of keep going.
Yeah, it took a lot of courage to do that. And in that process of finding self, a buddy of mine called me up and said, "Hey, Mike, would you mind being my manager of this music production company?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I was like, "I am not music, Amna," right? I was like, imagine
never been
this.
An interest of yours, never been anything you're interested in.
Entertainment and media, no way. I said, those people are stupid, right? Like, literally, I said that, Amna. I was like, because you look at my point of view. Like, I did nuclear chemical research. Like, I won awards for nuclear chemical research, right? Like, I interned at one of the most top, engineering companies, right, that were known for. And so that was a presence of mind I had.
But at that point, so did you go to Florida?
Yeah, oh yeah, I was there. I was bartending.
Did you have any sort of like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that? Or
no.
Was it just, let's just settle back
I was going to figure it out.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I was on my way, of course. I was one of those kids too as well. I'm going to backpack Europe and just find self in the mountains in the Swiss Alps somewhere. This like amazing moment that never came. It's a dream, people. That's only in the movies.
So the offer, exactly, yeah. So the offer comes in for this music gig, and you say no right away?
I say no immediately, and I said no multiple times. His name is Marcus Collins, and he kept calling me, and so finally I said, "Why do you want me?" And then he said the reasons why. He said, "You're really great at business. You're a people person. I think this fits you." He was also an engineer too as well.
Oh, really?
From University of Michigan. Yeah, so there's a trend there as well.
It's
so
like a whole group of
y'all. Make a long story short, I started managing the production company from there. I decided to turn it into a record label, Muse Recordings, and then that's really how the story began. So then I moved back to Michigan, but this time I moved to the city of Detroit, and I really get immersed into the business. And we had this incredible success, Amna. So I was able to, we wrote a business plan and got some venture capital. And then we got these amazing strategic partnerships with Starbucks and Chrysler and the NFL and McDonald's. And
it just took off.
And it just took off. And then it became this narrative. Like, how does this kid go from nuclear chemical research, amass these strategic partnerships of these 360 deals when at the time a lot of major companies didn't have it. And by the way, we weren't on MTV, right? We had no spins on the radio. We weren't charting on Billboard, right? But we still had this success. And so then I moved to New York, and then that became the story, right? That's really the branding story of me became known. And that's when I started guest lecturing at different colleges and universities, and that's when radio came calling. My first radio gig was WGCI in Chicago. I would call in from New York from 4 to 5, the Tony Skio show, and we would just talk about the business of music. For just an hour time period, and it was absolutely incredible. And then from there, I got other opportunities.
How did the interest? Because you're one of those rare people who is incredibly well versed, incredibly well experienced, and incredibly articulate and knowledgeable about entertainment. But you've also got this side of you where you follow politics, news events, social justice, like you're in all the issues that matter in our day too.
Yeah.
How did those two come together?
Great question, Amna. You're good at this. You're really good.
I've done a couple of these.
Yeah, literally. So what happened was, so after all that TV, radio, I was doing all that. President Obama at the time, Senator Obama, and at the time candidate Obama, announced his candidacy January of 2007. The campaign called me up in March of 2007 that I got recommended to be part of the Tri-State Finance Committee. And of course, Amna, with the trend I said earlier, I said, nope, not interested, not at all.
No?
Absolutely. I said,
Why?
You have the wrong guy, because they wanted me to fundraise. And I said, I'm not a fundraiser. I said, I never fundraised a day in my life, but I was like, hey, your guy's great. I'm going to support him. I'm going to vote for him. Yeah, I didn't think he was going to win, but I was like, I'm still going to vote for him anyways.
You didn't think he was going to win?
Not at all. And so they said, you know what? I said, what we hear about you from all these different touch points you have in media, again, and reaching different youth and youthful demographics, we believe you can bring that energy into the campaign. They said, come to one meeting. It can't hurt. I want to be really mindful of time, Mom. You have to realize this when he first started. This was based in New York City, Clinton territory country. It wasn't like millions of people were beating down the door to be part of this campaign, right? And
so I want to be. This is a story a lot of people don't know. Like the early days.
This is like literally like third month in, right?
There was no bandwagon.
There was no bandwagon.
Like, will you help us?
Literally, so that's, I don't want to think people, I'm like some god from 2016 time period 12. Definitely want to oversell myself, man. I was just a kid. They heard about me. I finally came to a meeting and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then here we are.
You were sold.
Sold. And 8 years later, I became known as the youngest person to raise $1 million for a sitting president, like in 1 year. Oh, for a presidential candidate, like in 1 year. And so that just kind of just took off. And I'm in that moment where the intersection began was I started leveraging my contacts and resources I had in the media entertainment realm. And I started using my political connections to really entice the pop culture, the media entertainment realm too as well. And I said, you know what? politics is giving my media counterparts a voice, right? It's giving them a platform. And remember, this is 2008, so before there were hashtagging, right? Before there was this social media activism. So really think about it from that time period, where it's allowing them a platform to engage and participate. And then I was using pop culture to kind of help translate the messaging, that was happening. And then I woke up one day and I said, oh my God, I'm really intersecting this. And so now that's what I do. So all the work that I do, it has to have this intersection. If it doesn't have the intersection, I won't do it. I won't participate in it. And it's now my passion. If you, as a separate Amna, if it's just music or media entertainment, it's just a love. Right? And if it's just politics on its own, it's just a love. It doesn't get me out of bed separately. But what gets me out of bed every day is a combination of the two. And then I discover my passion.
It feels like everything is happening at that intersection these days. And it comes to a head really around award season. Right? And we got to do this great Oscar nomination show together recently. The Oscars are just around the corner now. So I wanted to try to focus a lot of the conversation on Hollywood, about what we know about representation, why things are changing, why they aren't changing. But let's talk about that in particular. Because when we talk about representation, when we talk about Hollywood, it's not anecdotal, right? It's not like, oh, I just haven't seen people like me or people like you or whatever. There's evidence, right? There's a number of studies that show that representation is severely lacking when it comes to the rest of America and Hollywood. So minorities are what, like a little over 40% of the country right now? We're not represented when it comes to the big screen and in Hollywood. Before we get into specifics, just big picture, why do you think that is? Why is there such a lag?
There's a lack of this whole unconscious biases, I think, that exist all throughout Hollywood. And I think that is very reflective of industries and sectors across America, whether it's in finance, whether it's in law, whether it's in consumer good products. There is this notion, and think about it, Amna, like when McDonald's has a commercial, right? And they're advertising, let's just say, for example, a new cheeseburger, right? They literally have 4 different commercial spots for that cheeseburger. They have a cheeseburger for the Hispanic market, right? With Hispanic actors. They don't have a cheeseburger with African Americans eating it. They don't have a cheeseburger with single mom taking her kids to a soccer game and they stop along the way to get a hamburger. And so we've always segmented our population, right? And so but people understand that hamburgers and cheeseburgers are universal, people, right? Soccer moms just don't eat cheeseburgers on the way to soccer practice.
That is a platform you can run on. Run like hamburgers and cheeseburgers, guys.
They're really universal.
You can't get behind that.
You can't. And I think that's what translates into Hollywood, right? And there's these segmented roles, right? So this character is only for a black character, or this character is only for a white female, right? And then this role or this storyline is only for Black Americans. There's no way Black Americans will enjoy a horror film, right? There's no way Black Americans can rally around a film of majority LGBTQ identity dynamics and issues, and there's no way they can see that, right? But in essence, they will, because African American stories are universal American stories, right? And I heard this fantastic quote recently from a lady, and she said, the more, and she's an African American woman doing fantastic work in Hollywood on the animation side, and she said, you know what, when you lean into what makes you different, she said, that's the more universal your story will become. And she said, because when you lean into that, so everyone can recognize something in you in themselves.
Because it gets down to that granular, like the details of our lives that are actually the things that
human
we share.
Interest stories, human connectivity.
But this conversation, because when we talk about Hollywood, sometimes we talk about it like it's something separate. And it feels like, and tell me if you think I'm right or wrong here, it feels like when we talk about it now, we're treating it more sort of like an institutional power in the same way we talk about representation in politics or in finance or in other fields. Is that a fair way to talk about it now?
Every example they use is spot on, because it really goes down to class. Right? When you think about Hollywood, you think about classism, right? You think about how much money these actors make. You think how much these studios make. The directors, how much they make per film. During the glory days of Hollywood, actors were commanding $20 million per film at the top of their league. That's a lot of money, right? And all these awards for presentation are nothing but champagne and black tie and tuxedos. But it's actually no different than what you said about finance and Wall Street, right? When you think about finance, think about the 1%ers, right? And so money sometimes in this society that we're in equates to status. It equates to these institutions, right? It kind of that narrative of too big to fail that we heard in 2008, right? In the bailout scenarios, these banks are too big to fail. It's too valuable, right? They represent too much of the American fabric of who we are. And unfortunately, we allow ourselves to get caught up in that mentality. And so that's why Hollywood has been able to have this institutional aspect of it, because of the money and power that it yields.
Let's talk about some of the numbers, though, because when preparing for this conversation, I had to kind of remind myself just how bad it is in some places. But there are a number of places that look at the data year to year. One is the University of Southern California, where the Annenberg Communications School releases every year their Media Diversity and Social Change Initiative report. From last year, this is a quote, representation of women, minorities, LGBT people, disabled characters in films remains largely unchanged from the previous year, despite heightened attention to diversity in Hollywood. Does that surprise you? That for as much as we're talking about it, there really wasn't a lot of change year to year?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it takes the executives who are there in order to cast and to hire, right? And so that's still a very monolithic demographic, generally still white males run the studios, right? And in charge of the casting and the aspect of it, and the directors who select. Now, I do believe there is a change that is coming slowly, right? And so what we're seeing now is this, especially happening within television. I think television is going to lead the way for the big screen.
Interesting.
Right?
Why do you think that is?
Great question, because when you see television, I think now television is diverse as it's ever been, right? And so not only and still it's a long way to go, so that I'm saying that relatively speaking. But now you're seeing so many, most important, so many black showrunners where we've never seen before.
And showrunners, right? For someone who doesn't understand the industry, those are the people who kind of hold the editorial control.
Yeah,
right?
The creators of the show, right. The ones who create.
Like Shonda Rhimes,
right? The writers, and they select the directors, they keep the temple of it, and they're involved in hiring the casting of it.
Yeah.
So if you have black showrunners now, they're able to now pick black or minority or female or LGBTQ directors, which you're seeing that across the board of diverse shows now.
Yeah.
There's almost a different director every week. So what that's doing is allowing that female or allowing that black or Hispanic or Asian or Indian American now to get experience in their reel, so now they can present that to Hollywood if they so choose to go to the big screen. Where before they always say, well, did you have any experience? They say, no, I've never directed anything. Well, then I can't hire you based on the merits. But now that's changing because now I actually do have experience. I do have a reel. I have directed X amount of episodes on television shows before. And let's be fair and honest too, Amna, it wasn't about the merits previously, right? Like you hear these amazing stories.
Yeah.
There's even a film that got nominated. I'm not going to call them out, but there's a film that got nominated last year, La La Land, right? And so they were just talking about how
by the way,
I was looking for permission to call them out. And it was amazing. I heard an interview and when they were creating it, and they said, yeah, we just went to the studio with this idea. Right? And the studios bought into it and they funded this.
And what did you think when you heard that?
And I was like, oh my God, is it that easy? For some people, just to be able to have this idea, to go into the studio with no test, no short film of it, no version of it, and just have this conversation.
Yeah.
But that's really how things get done, right? And so that's when I question in Hollywood when it comes to the merit. There's another controversial, since we're uncomfortable, another controversial show coming on HBO with the creators of Game of Thrones with Confederacy.
Tell me about this. Yes. Is this still in the works now?
It's still in the works. Okay. As far as I know, it's still in the works, and I haven't seen anything different to prove otherwise. But I was reading the article from the president of HBO, and they were talking about how this show get greenlit. Now, granted, Game of Thrones is a huge hit for HBO.
Absolutely.
I want to be very mindful of that.
Yeah.
And so I get it. I get why they can go in so easily.
So there's a proven record to say, yes, audiences, good television.
Absolutely. Especially Game of Thrones. I'm going to be very specific and clear what I'm saying right now.
100%.
But what the president said was that when he greenlit the idea, when they came to him, he hadn't even read the treatment yet. Right? And in the article, he said, I haven't even seen the episodes yet. I don't even know how they're going to tell the story. But yet you were willing to take a chance on this very controversial topic.
Right.
No matter what it is.
A lot of blowback,
however you
just
say.
Announcing it.
Yeah. The Confederate flag is a very controversial topic.
Yeah.
And you decided not to even look at the treatment. You decided not to even consider other episodes, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's easy for some. So when it comes
You're saying like the right questions aren't even being asked at that level because the people who might ask the questions aren't in those positions of power.
Exactly. And then that's how you get to these unconscious biases that exist and no one's there to question. But then it really undermines this whole notion of merit, and you have to have this incredible resume and dossier. Right. I'm using two very distinct examples here, but just to highlight, a very controversial issue about what is at stake and what the issue is in Hollywood.
Well, it's hard to in the creative fields when you talk about merit, right? It's not like it's not like in finance where you can say this person made this much money year over year. In the creative industry, it's a little harder to talk about merit, right? Does that complicate the issue too?
That's what it is.
Subjective.
It's very subjective, and that's when you get to the boys club narrative, right? And that's when they start hiring, casting their friends. I worked with Johnny on my previous 2 films, so then why wouldn't I hire Johnny to be the lead on this film, right? It's just that you usually hire and go with who you know. Right?
You're talking about Johnny Depp, right? And the Pirates of the Caribbean, obviously. Why would you not go with Johnny?
We can totally run with that.
I want to talk about a couple of different breakdowns, because when we talk about representation, it's not just about race. There's gender breakdowns too. There's disabled Americans being underrepresented. But this number really fascinated me. So this report I referenced earlier, just talking about the place of women in Hollywood in those films, what they did was they looked at 2016's top 100 films, and they looked at all the speaking and named roles. So it's very specific. It's like, who has an actual role that's worth paying attention to in these films? So they looked at 4,583 speaking characters. Of all of those characters, 31% were female in 2016. You look at that and you think, okay, that's not so bad, right? But then they went on to say that number is basically unchanged since 2007.
Wow.
So in almost a decade, there wasn't a shift at all. Does that surprise you? We're not talking about race at all, representation. This is just women in the industry.
It doesn't surprise me one bit.
Nothing's going to surprise you today. You're going to be like, it's a mess. It needs
work. You know why, Amna? Because it kind of goes down to what we were just saying in the previous conversation. If there's nobody in the room to say, hey guys, and I do mean guys literally.
Right. Gentlemen.
Yeah, gentlemen. There's something wrong here, right? Like, there is an issue that needs to be addressed. Where are the women? And why don't more of our characters have more speaking roles, right? Yeah. Or why are we not casting broadly? Or why are we not adding characters to the storyline that could be just as impactful, that has women characters in it? And so again, it goes to, if people just aren't in the room to raise their hand and ask these questions, most people just won't think about it, right? It's because that's what you're used to, right? And that's really what it goes down to.
Can that still be an excuse these days, though, when you talk about, like, if you have a Twitter account, you know what people are saying about representation. Like, it's hard these days to be unaware.
Yeah.
I think about some of the conversations that are going on. Is that still a valid excuse? Like, there's no one in the room, we didn't know.
Yeah. It's not a valid excuse whatsoever. But to me, there is reason to believe why they still are slow to make the change, right? This isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to keep individuals like yourself, or not yourself personally, but having a platform that allows diverse opinions and thoughts to kind of come on your programming and to discuss this. It's going to take more activists to have hashtags. It's going to take more women in Hollywood to kind of come out and keep leading this movement. Don't give up on it. Keep wearing your color themes and your attires, and keep making these speeches at the Oscars and the other award shows in order for it to really set in, right? And because individuals who have the position of power, they will obviously say, yeah, that makes sense, but I'm not doing it. Right? Like, I'm fine.
Well, so
I'm not. Yeah.
This is the question.
I'm not misogynistic.
If you're
racist
someone
or homophobic
in that position of power, able to make those kinds of decisions, able to control who hires whom and what gets greenlit and what doesn't, what's the selling point? Like, if you walk into a room with someone and you've tried to convince one of those heads of the studios this is something that they want to do, if they're doing all right. Yeah, and it doesn't upset their lives at all to continue with the status quo.
Yeah.
Why would they be incentivized to do that, to make those kind of changes?
Because in their mind, they're okay. In their mind, I'm married. I have daughters at home. So how could I be misogynistic?
Right.
You know what I mean? I have that black friend. How can I be racist? I have a gay couple that come over every Sunday for dinner. How can I be homophobic? Right? And so they're not really recognizing the mindset of what it is they're actually doing until they get called out. I mean, a great example of this, Amna, literally, we just witnessed this last Sunday at the Grammys. After the Grammys came out, there was a big protest that came up about how women did not get recognized enough in the major categories, nor did even the one female, Lorde, who was up for Best Album, have the opportunity to even perform. And we literally had, in this moment when Janelle Monáe made this fantastic speech for women's issues, for women's rights within the music industry and the Recording Academy, talk about the women. Yeah. And then the president of the Recording Academy came out and said, women just need to step up more.
Yeah.
That answers your question right there. And he was literally sitting in the audience when he heard Janelle Monáe make that statement. He saw on Twitter what women were reacting to, and he still came out and said they need to step up.
Right. And he later, we should clarify, walked back those comments. He faced an enormous blowback because
absolutely
walked them back and said, I misspoke. I meant to say that we need to be there to support women, to help them along the way. But it was incredibly troubling that that was his first remark.
But it goes back to the initial reaction, right? The initial reaction is this.
Right.
In spite of all this activism that we saw on his stage.
Yeah.
That's not even talking about the award shows previously in other industries that talked about it, literally just in that space. So again, that goes back to this unconscious bias. It's not me. I'm not the problem, right?
So
others are.
Let's talk about where the change is happening now, because we mentioned early on that the Oscars So White hashtag, right? It took 2 years of no actors of color across both the leading and supporting categories, and that hashtag trending and everyone actually talking about it for the Academy to institutionalize some real change, right? Among their leadership as well. Are you heartened at all by what you're seeing happening now, by the categories or the nominations we just saw, the fact that Moonlight won Best Picture last year? Does that show you there's change happening in a real way?
Absolutely. I'm feeling really great about it, actually. We still have, again, I want to be very clear, relatively speaking, we still have a long way to go. But we're doing a lot better than we have over the years of the Academy.
Yeah.
But it goes to what you're saying is that it's one thing to talk about it. Right? There's one thing to have these hashtags. And again, shout out to April Rain who created the hashtag Oscar So White, but it goes to the action behind it. And it goes beyond just forming a task force. Like how many task force are out there where we actually see no results, right? And it's a PR strategy. We're going to form a task force, right? Yeah. That's the immediate response. And I'm not devaluing task force. They work when you are authentically interested in having it to work, right? So I'm still waiting on the Recording Academy to see what they're going to do with their task force, right? Well, the Oscars, though, what they did was they had meetings and they intentionally, with thought, and it goes to intentionality, they intentionally wanted a new, diverse inductees of their class of members to be inducted into the Academy.
Basically bringing people into the power circle.
Literally,
right?
Who are diverse, who are more women, right? Who are different ethnic backgrounds, different identities, right? And in doing so, Amna, they had to cut some people from the role too as well. And so you have to make those uncomfortable decisions to cut, right? To cut this monolithic demographic of your base and add on more diverse individuals to come into these categories. And as we're seeing that as they have intentionally decided to be more diverse in their induction process of it, we're now starting to see more representation throughout the categories now in the Academy. So I'm just thinking maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think we're even going to be more diverse than we already are right now. And so it takes the uncomfortable decisions, and it also takes authentic intentionality in doing it. But Amna, it also says not to be afraid to say Black, brown, Hispanic, Indian, Asian, gay, women. Right? You have to say these words, right? It's too easy to hide in this diversity and inclusion. That's safe, right? But when you actually call it by its name, no pun intended, it becomes real, right? And that's when the uncomfortability happens. But that's when change happens, when you're uncomfortable.
So is it worrying to you at all, though, that it takes like 2 years of public shame, basically, a trending hashtag of people saying, what is happening here? Like real outrage before that kind of change occurs. Is that troubling?
You know what's troubling, Amna, is that it's going to take more than just those 2 years. It's troubling that we're still going to have to keep using that hashtag as a reminder, right? It's troubling that we're still going to have hashtag Time's Up. It's troubling that we're still going to have the hashtag Me Too, right? And because you're going to have to hold feet to the fire, because it takes a while for people to make that mental shift. A lot of this is very generational when you think about it.
Do you think that's true, too?
Yes.
That people, as they grow and change and they're growing up in a different America, they will just know that their priorities are different?
I think there's a generation coming behind us that will eventually become to recognize that separate priorities no longer work in this American fabric, but we need to have more inclusive priorities to represent all of America and really defining what America is. It's difficult for me not to bring politics into the conversation. That makes it more challenging and difficult because the way we talk about the immigration, the way we talk about xenophobia is very counterintuitive to what is actually happening in generations behind who are being instilled that we're all the same. We all have value. We all have equals. When we have those adults in a room who are using this very xenophobic public kind of commentary of othering and fear mongering that's taking place, but it holds to the fire those who have the microphone, those who have a camera, right, to really make sure they hold everyone's feet to the fire. And also too, if you have a cell phone with your hashtag and your Twitter, right, and that's the part that gives me hope, is that others haven't been empowered now, no matter if you make $20 million a year or if you make $20 an hour, right, you still have equal power to create the change that needs to happen. But it bothers me that it's going to have to keep continuing, because the moment you let up, the moment you get complacent, that's when things go right back to where they were.
You mentioned people making $20 million a year. I want to ask you about the role of celebrities in this, because obviously a lot of the power resides with the executives, with the decision makers. But as we've seen recently, and one of the suggestions that this one report made that looked at diversity, one of the suggestions was, hey, if you start getting those A-list celebrities to have equity written into their contracts, like, I'm going to make sure that my co-stars of color or other people of diverse backgrounds are paid equitably, or that I'm in some way tied to them, like we saw recently with I can't remember the actor's name now. It was Jessica Chastain and Octavia Spencer, right? That they said, okay, we're going to go in this together, where our fates are tied to some degree. You work with celebrities and in social change. Do you think that is a viable way to start to hold those folks accountable, to say you're responsible for making sure this happens too?
Ooh, here we go with the uncomfortable part of the conversation.
You can name names.
Yeah.
If you like.
It's so important for celebrities to step up and do that, Amna. But unfortunately, celebrities are afraid of the endorsements deals to go wrong and sour.
That's it.
Let's take Michael Jordan, for example. Michael Jordan in his past, yes, he's given money recently, and we want to salute him for that. But in the past, he wouldn't support political parties or political interests, and he would say, Democrats buy my shoes as well as Republicans buy my shoes, right? And so that is a great example of the mindset generationally that celebrities have from then to now about, if I engage in this, will this affect and hurt my brand, right? If I engage in this, not in my brand in terms of economics, but will this alienate some members of my fan base, right? Because a lot of individuals and celebrities think that sports is neutral.
Right.
A lot of individuals think that the films that people come to see is neutral. And that musicians, they always say, hey, I have people from all sides, come to my concerts and tours. So they're afraid to really mess up their bottom line, their economics. But I think time for that has changed, right? And I think a good case study to really reflect that is two interesting points. Let's look at Colin Kaepernick, for example. Right. Colin Kaepernick, his jersey shot up to be one of the top selling jerseys within the NFL.com store. First taking a knee. Nothing didn't happen, right, in terms of economics. But then you look at the individual, oh my God, I'm going to mess up his name. Alejandro, he plays with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I'm not the right person to answer.
So he played with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's a former military vet. And there was a moment in a football game when the Pittsburgh Steelers decided to stay in the locker room just to avoid the controversy altogether. Right. He actually came out, not recognizing cameras were catching him, outside the tunnel, and he saluted the American flag, and he didn't take a knee. But you know what happened, Amna? His jersey went up just as well. And so those are two case studies on opposite ends of the spectrums, who are both celebrities and have high impact on society, but yet they still had economic success with their brand. And so to all the celebrities out there that are listening, let that be the gauge, right? And that nowadays consumers and fans and consumers now want their consumer good companies to stand for something, right? They want them to have a constitution they're going to rally behind and support their consumer goods. It's no different now what they want to see in their celebrities, right? And their athletes.
Hollywood, same thing with actors.
Hollywood. Like, we want to know what your constitution is, right? The day of you just sitting silent and getting your hair and makeup done and having me come pay $16.50 for a movie theater and you don't speak up for anything are done, right? Like, I want to hear what you have to say. And with that being said, there needs to be more allies in that, right? What was troubling about, to me, the recording academies, I'm sure you know this now, the females executives within the music industry came out and wrote this fantastic letter, and I'm so glad that they did, right? But you know who was missing from that? Was the female executives and the actual record labels was missing from that. And one has to say on the other side, I get it, right? Their jobs are on the line.
People are looking out for their own self-interest too, right?
And I'm not saying that's wrong.
At what point does it make sense to engage?
Exactly. So I have to say I understand their point, and I'm not saying the female record executives are wrong for that. And I understand it's a difficult and uncomfortable position to be in, but in that instance, that's when you need your male counterparts in the record labels to come out and say something is wrong. Then the men in the record labels need to be the allies, just as well as the white females in Hollywood was an ally for the blacks in terms of and the equity and wage gap that existed.
Mike Muse, before I let you go, toughest question I'm going to ask you: who is going to win Best Picture at the Oscars?
Woo! Great question, Amna.
You're on the record now. This is it. Who's going to win?
Okay, so here's the thing, Amna.
This is going to be the most complicated.
Yeah. You see, that's why I get nervous. I'm like wiping my hands on my knees. I'm like, I can't believe you asked me that question.
Everything else you just said. Who's going to win?
What threw me off is last year. So last year you had Moonlight.
Yeah.
Won, but up against the machine La La Land.
Yes.
Right? It was La La Land.
Yeah.
You know, this big money maker, this big money machine.
Right.
So now it's leaving me to believe, like, is the Academy comfortable with art house type films? You know, so can Call Me By Your Name get in there?
Yeah.
Can Get Out, get in there?
You think Get Out has a chance?
I think Get Out has, only because based upon last year's precedent that's set.
Is that your final answer?
Because what we're seeing right now is 3 Billboards is like the La La Land of last year, right? Oh, it's just theirs. Just give it to them. Just give it to them. It's a shoe in. But it's like, I don't know what the Academy's going to do. So I think it's going to be I think we're going to see a surprise. And I think the surprise is either Call Me By Your Name, Get Out, or Lady Bird.
I'm going to give you 3 answers because you're Mike Muse.
Yes, I know. Thank you. That was too hard.
And I'm going to thank you for your time.
I plead the 5th.
Thank you so much for being
Amna, you're amazing. Thank you
really
so much for. I actually got uncomfortable today and a couple of times.
That's the point.
I actually squirmed a little bit.
Thanks, Mike Muse.
Thanks, Amna.
Thank you for listening to Uncomfortable. If you like what we're doing, take a minute, leave us a rating and a quick review. It helps others to find these conversations, and we really just want to hear what you think. Plus, we've made it easy. Just click on the link in the description of this episode. If you have an idea for a show topic or a guest, leave it in the reviews or tweet at me at Nawazistan. That's NAWAZISTAN, or use the hashtag #UncomfortableTalk. Uncomfortable is a production of ABC News. New episodes post every 2 weeks on Tuesday mornings. I'm Amna Nawaz. Thanks for listening.